Hello, NFL football fans and fantasy football owners. Welcome back to the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, the place where you get expert fantasy advice for champions. As always, I'm your host, NFL fantasy football expert, analyst, and draft scout, Lance Goodman, preparing fantasy football owners for their upcoming live drafts as the NFL 2024 season is just weeks away. We're going to shift our attention now over to the tight end position. And when it comes to fantasy football, the tight end position can be a make or break it type ordeal. There is usually not a lot of depth or top tier talent at the position, but this year things seem to be a little bit different. Let's go ahead and talk about some very good options that fantasy football owners have. There's usually an outbreak at the top. In past years, it's been about Travis Kelce, the likes of George Kittle, Mark Andrews, to a certain degree when healthy and in his prime, Darren Waller. But this year, there is much more depth, and it's going to allow for fantasy football owners to draft a little bit differently, knowing that you can still have some trustworthy and quality guys at that tight end position that you can pick up in the mid to later rounds to help fill out your roster. So let's go ahead and hop right in. These players are not ranked. I'm not talking about them in any particular order, but all of these guys who made the cut and made the list are definitely guys you're going to want to have on your team. Let's go ahead and start with Kyle Pitts of the Atlanta Falcons. We know that consistency has been the problem for him since coming into the NFL. Let's hope that a new quarterback in Kirk Cousins, a veteran guy who's much more adept at reading the football field and utilizing his tight end in the short passing game, and especially in the red zone, can give him an uptick in production and allow for him to have the type of fantasy football season that reflects his individual talent and skill set. We do have to put some of the onus on Pitts. Hopefully put the work in the offseason to elevate his game as well. Let's move on to a two-headed monster over for the Baltimore Ravens. We're talking about Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. In years past, Mark Andrews was the unquestioned guy at the tight end position, definitely taken in the top three off the board, right in that mix with George Kittle and Travis Kelce. But with the way that Isaiah Likely emerged last year, going to be very difficult for quarterback Lamar Jackson and that Baltimore offense to ignore him. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how those guys are used. And with the way that Likely is now a major player in that offense, where do you draft Likely? Where do you draft Andrews? Do you get them both in case one has an injury? Are you going to be able to trust and rely on them on a weekly basis? That is definitely something that's going to be a huge discussion that fantasy football owners need to think about as live drafts approach. A guy that you don't have to think about is going to be second-year tight end Sam Laporta from the Detroit Lions. Had a breakout season as a rookie, is going to be a staple in that Detroit Lions offense. If he just puts up even the numbers he did last year, without question, you're going to want him on your fantasy football team. The sky's the limit for this guy if he's gotten even better. Let's move on to Trey McBride of the Arizona Cardinals. I think he's another one of those guys who came in the last season with really without a name at all. But the way that Kyler Murray, the Cardinals quarterback, fell in love with him the second half of the season when he returned to the lineup makes Trey McBride a major player for fantasy football owners out there. Arizona's offense got better on the outside, drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. and bringing over a veteran in Zay Jones. And so if Trey McBride continues to be a staple in that Arizona offense, a quarterback like Kyler Murray will be able to continue to bring out the best in him. Let's move on to Cole Kmet of the Chicago Bears. You have to love the prospects for him. You have an upgrade at quarterback in Caleb Williams. And with the additions that the Bears made on the outside, not only do they have DJ Moore now, you factor in Keenan Allen, as well as rookie wide receiver Rome Odunze. That's going to allow for Cole Kmet to really take advantage of single coverage against slower linebackers and smaller safeties. This is probably a guy who's going to see a lot of targets in the red zone and on third down in the short passing game. We all know that a tight end is a rookie quarterback security blanket and best friend. Let's move on to another dual set of tight ends when you talk about Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox for the Buffalo Bills. Kincaid had a very strong rookie campaign, but a lot of that was on the heels of an injury that Dawson Knox suffered that put him out for about a 6 to 8 week stretch. It'll be interesting to see how the Bills look to utilize both of those guys, or can Kincaid potentially emerge as the dominant tight end and one of the main target share guys in that new Buffalo Bills offense, which is going to have a completely brand new set of wide receivers for quarterback Josh Allen to get the football to. Let's move over to the Dallas Cowboys. Jake Ferguson is a guy that you're definitely going to want to keep your eyes on. Dak Prescott established a lot of rapport and chemistry with him last year, especially on third down and in the red zone. That big body at 6'5", very athletic, is definitely a guy that you're going to want on your team. I love the way Dallas implemented him last year, and I think he could be even better this year. TJ Hawkinson is a guy that we definitely have to look into deeply. Suffered that bad ACL and MCL tear in week 16 of last year. Likely going to start the season on the physically unable to perform list. We may not see him until week 5 or 6. Nonetheless, if he comes back very healthy, you know fantasy football is really a season of seasons, meaning you have the first half of the season, the second half of the season, and then the playoff run, and that's when you want your team peaking and your players playing their best football. If Hawkinson can get back to form, he could prove pivotal and be very impactful for fantasy football owners from weeks 8, 9, 10, and beyond. Let's talk about David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns. We've seen with quarterback Joe Flacco was able to utilize him last year with Deshaun Watson back at the helm, and really only one dominant receiver in Amari Cooper in that Browns offense. You'd have to think that David Njoku, after what he did last year, will be a focal point in that Cleveland Browns offense, especially in the red zone. Dalton Schultz of the Houston Texans. Yes, the Texans have Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, and Tank Dell, but when you have weapons like that on the outside, defenses have to pay those guys so much attention. A tight end like Dalton Schultz, who's still young at 26 years old, can definitely be a nice late round sleeper pick. Maybe if you don't even have him as a starter, can provide some excellent quality depth for your team. How about Evan Ingram of the Jacksonville Jaguars? Has really came into his own and found his niche in that Jacksonville offense. Had a career year last year with up over 90 catches. Head coach Doug Peterson loves to use him all over the football field. I expect for him to have another big year for the Jaguars. Let's talk about a couple veterans in George Kittle, still a major player in that San Francisco offense, but we know that those skill position players outside of Christian McCaffrey can be very difficult to deal with sometime from week to week. It may be George Kittle. It could be wide receiver Deebo Samuel. It could be wide receiver Brandon Ayuk. And so consistency is really the only concern that you have about George Kittle. But outside of that, we know that he's a big-time player, and when he gets to targets, can produce at a high clip. Taysom Hill of the New Orleans Saints, not tabbed as a tight end, but has tight end value. When you're able to pick him up off the waiver wire, we know his bread and butter is not so much catching the football, but we've even seen in the preseason, he's going to continue to be a part of that Wildcat offense and gets enough goal line carries throughout the course of the season that you'd like to have him on your roster. And then rounding out our list is going to be none other than the king himself, and that will be Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. We know his numbers were down for his standards last year. Still had 93 catches, still had over 800 yards. We just like to see him get more consistent. But again, at 34 years old, he's openly admitted to himself that he's been dealing with a rash of injuries. Let's see if he's motivated this year, if his mind is fully on football, not off the field activities. If so, we know that this guy is still a major player. Either way, too good of a player, too good of a quarterback in Patrick Mahomes to pass up. I think it's just a matter of drafting him at the right time to make sure that when you do put him on your team, he gives you the most bang for your buck. It's going to wrap up our segment today. Make sure to join us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Leave your thoughts, leave your comments, and it'll be more of the NFLExporter.com and the Fantasy Football Show when we return right after this.